When we build real-world applications, one type of data that comes up all the time is dates and times. So let's learn the fundamentals of dates and times in this video so that in the next one we can then implement them into our application. Now, dates and time can be a little bit messy and confusing in JavaScript. And so just like with numbers, I will try to make the fundamentals here as clear as possible. So first, we need to actually create a date. So create a date. And there are exactly 4 ways of creating dates in JavaScript. I mean, they all use the newDate constructor function, but they can accept different parameters. So let's see how. So the first way is simply to use the newDate constructor like this. And then we can assign this to a variable. And let's just call it now. And then here I'm logging now to the console. And so we get the current date and time at this very moment. So you see that Sunday, August the 2nd, 2020, and plus this time here. Next up, the second way is to parse the date from a date string. So again, we use newDate, and then we can pass in a string. And for example, this string here would work just fine. For example, just this part here. Okay, so simply giving JavaScript a string here, and it will then automatically parse the time based on that. And so that's the second date that we get here. But we can also, of course, write a string ourselves. For example, let's try Christmas here. So we can even write December 24, 2015 or something. And so indeed, that works. And we even get the day of the week here. So JavaScript is pretty smart in parsing out this string that we write here. Now, however, it's generally not a good idea to do this because it can be quite unreliable. All right. However, if the string was actually created by JavaScript itself, then of course it is pretty safe. So actually in our accounts object, or in our account 1, for example, we now have these dates. So movement dates. And so let's try to parse this string here. So let's create a new date object in JavaScript based on that string. So that's in account one dot movement dates and then 0. All right. So again, this is okay because it was JavaScript who created that date that I just showed you there. So this date here. And by the way, this Z here means the UTC. So that's the Coordinated Universal Time, which is basically the time without any time zone in London and also without daylight savings. So that's based on a string, but we can also pass in year, month, day, hour, minute, hence even second into this constructor. So let's say 2037 and 10, 19, 15, 23 minutes and 5 seconds. So indeed, we get November 19, 2037 at 15 hours, 23 minutes, 5 seconds, just as we have here. Now you might have noticed that here we have 10, but November is actually the month 11, right? And so that means that the month here in JavaScript is 0 based. And that's a little bit weird, but well, we can just get used to that, right? Now, what's cool about this is that JavaScript actually autocorrects the day. So let's try this here again differently. So let's try November 31st. But we know that November only has 30 days, right? And so if we take a look at this, it will then autocorrect right to the next day. So that's going to be December 1st. And we can even try November 33rd, which should then be December 3rd. Okay, so this sometimes is actually pretty useful. Finally, we can also pass into the date constructor function the amount of milliseconds passed since the beginning of the Unix time, which is January 1st, 1970. So let's see that. So again, new date. And if we pass in 0, so 0 milliseconds after that initial Unix time, then indeed we get January 1st, 1970. Okay, and this will actually be pretty useful, even though it looks a bit strange. And let's now create a date that is 3 days after this. And so that is essentially 3 times, which is 3 days, and 1 day is made out of 24 hours, which is made out of 60 minutes, which is made out of 60 minutes, which is made out of 1000 milliseconds. And so this is how we convert from days to milliseconds. So 3 days times 24 hours, which is the number of hours in 1 day, times 60, which is the number of minutes in 1 hour, then times 60, which is the number of seconds in 1 minute, and then times 1000 to convert to milliseconds. And so now we get January 4th. So that's exactly 3 days later. Okay, and this number that we calculated here, let's actually calculate it also here. So this is the timestamp. So we call this here a timestamp of the day number 3, essentially. And we will see why this is useful a little bit later. Now, these dates that we just created here are in fact just another special type of object. And so therefore, they have their own methods, just like arrays or maps or strings. And so we can use these methods to get or to set components of a date. All right. So working with dates here, and let's now actually create a date again. And this time we're going to store it in a variable. Let's call it future. So new date, and let's actually use the same as this one. Okay, just without the seconds, that's not really necessary. Okay, let's just log it to the console here to make sure. Okay, and let's, for now at least, just comment out these here. So we already know how it works. Now we just want to work a little bit with this particular date. So we can use future, which remember is simply this object here, and then the method get full year. And so indeed we get 2037. There's also get year, but never use that. Okay, always use get full year. Don't make the mistake of using that other one. Next up we have get month, and remember that this one is 0 based. So 10 is actually the month number 11. Then we have get date, and this is actually the day. So I think that this method has a little bit of a weird name. And so that's because get day is actually not the day of the month, but the day of the week. Okay, and 0 here is Sunday, and so 4 is the Thursday. So we saw already that it's Thursday, and so that's equivalent to number 4. And then besides these, we also have 3 more, which is get hour or hours, minutes, and seconds. So sometimes these can be pretty useful to work with a date. Besides that, we can also get a nicely formatted string. So basically similar to what we have up here, to ISO string. All right, so this is the ISO string, which follows some kind of international standard. And maybe you noticed that this is actually similar to the string that we used before coming from account 1. So that's movement dates, right? So these were generated by exactly this method. And so that's one of the very useful cases, is when you want to convert a particular date object into a string that you can then store somewhere. Finally, we can also get the timestamp for the date. And remember that the timestamp is the milliseconds which have passed since January 1st, 1970. So get time. And so we see that this huge amount has passed, well, since that date. And now we can take this number and reverse this. So if we wanted, we could now create a new date only based on these milliseconds, and it would then give us exactly that same time. So you see, it's the same as this one, right? And so simply based on the milliseconds that have passed since January 1st, 1970. And timestamps are actually so important that there is a special method that we can use to get the timestamp for right now. So if you want simply the current timestamp for this exact moment, then you don't even need to create a new date. All we have to do is to call date.now. And that then gives us this timestamp. Okay. Finally, there are also the set versions of all of these methods. So let me just show you the one for the year. So I'm not going to go through all of them here. And so future.set full year. And this again is a method. So let's set it to 2040. And then we can take a look at our date. And so now it is November 19th, 2040. And of course, then the day of the month here has changed. And so yeah, there also exists set month, set date, set day, and so on and so forth. And these also perform autocorrection, just like here when we create a new date. Okay? So that's basically all the methods that you need to know about dates. And these last here are all quite intuitive, and all you need to know really is that there are all these different ways of creating dates. Now in the next video, we will then sum up what we just learned here to add dates to the Bankist application and make our project even better.